computer. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Moms at Work speaker series. Today, we have a very special guest. Heather is here joining us today, and we're going to talk a lot about data, pay equity, and all that fun stuff. So Heather, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Alex, and I really appreciate it. My name is Heather Krause, and I'm the founder of We All Count, a project for equity in data. And I founded We All Count after a couple of decades working in the data, working with data for businesses and governments and nonprofits, and realizing that even though people have a lot of really good intentions, there's not a lot of really good support or practical help out there for people who want to make sure that their data isn't racist or sexist or homophobic. There's a lot of talk about the fact that we shouldn't do that, but not a lot of good support in understanding how. So that's what We All Count is about. And I'm very, very excited to be here, Allison. Thanks.
You're welcome. So today's talk, we're going to talk about not just individuals, but how companies, leaders, HR people, and maybe we can talk about some of the practical tools and sort of data products that people can use, because that's your area of expertise. So let's say that I'm an HR person and I really want to get started on data equity. What do I do?
Yeah. So that's a great question. Yep. Thank you for phrasing it that way. And so if you're an HR person and you want to get started on data equity, you are in an incredibly powerful position. You are a very lucky person because you have many, many options. One of the really popular options right now is to start getting into something called pay equity. The laws around pay equity are changing a lot, and more companies are actually required to prove that they're paying people equitably.
Can you talk a little bit about that before we jump off? Because I think that's something that people need to know, that this is not going to be a choice for a long time. It's coming. Right. The law is coming.
Yeah. No matter where you are, if you're in Canada, the United States, Europe, many other countries, there already exists some kind of pay equity law in your jurisdiction. And in 2020, those laws really started to change, and they'll be changing quite a lot in the next 5 years. So what that means is if approached, your company has to actually be able to prove that it is paying people based on a compensation philosophy rather than accidentally paying them by the color of their skin or their gender or their religion or anything else about that person. And there's very, very practical things. It sounds really scary, but it's actually not as hard as it sounds. Okay. There's very, very practical things that you can do to figure that out. And basically, it involves only 3 things. You need the administrative data that you probably already have if you're an HR person. So you need to know, how long somebody's been working there, what their job title is, and how much they're getting paid. Okay. That's the first thing you need. And then the second thing you need is some way to determine what their social identities are, their protected classes. So let me stop and talk about the word protected classes. Protected classes are aspects of a person that the law says you are not allowed to pay this person or treat this person differently because of this aspect. So that's called a protected class. And some of them are the ones you would think, like you can't pay women less than men, or you can't pay people with dark skin less than people with light skin, but also stuff like age. Yeah. And it's, if somebody's over the age of 45, you can't pay them less, which is super interesting. I didn't know that when I first got started. And somebody had accidentally fired a person over the age of 45, and they got in trouble because they didn't have the data to back it up. Right. So your job as the HR person is to figure out how you're going to get these protected identity class data from your organization. Okay. And that's the only tricky part about pay equity, because you can't look at a person and decide for them what their gender is or what their race is or what their sexual orientation is. Some companies try to do that. Don't ever try to do that.
Don't ever do that. Yeah. Okay.
Like, I really can't think of a worse thing you can do. It's better to do nothing than to do that.
Do that. All right. Noted. Okay.
But the second kind of thing that some organizations try and do is do a survey asking people, what's your gender identity? What's your racial identity? Which is a really good idea. And however, it can be problematic because if there is a feeling that you are discriminating, not you as a person, but your company is discriminating, people might be hesitant to share, especially social identities that aren't physically obvious, like sexual orientation, or whether or not somebody's over the age of 45, or what their religion is.
Yeah.
So one of the good ideas is to get someone else to collect that and store that data, so that somebody outside of your company just does a really, really simple, totally private online survey where your organization, everyone in your organization gets to answer that. Very simple stuff, but that data never gets shared back with the organization. So your organization does not find out your social identities, but your social identities get to be matched up with the HR information, and somebody does an analysis just to make sure that people aren't accidentally being paid differently by these social identities or protected classes. So that's something you can do right away.
And so I'm going to give you some of the things that you often hear people say. Right?
Yeah, perfect.
Which is like, well, we haven't been able to get raises to people, so we're not going to be transparent on our job postings because we don't want people to get upset. Current employees, when people are going into pay equity, how do you then roll that out? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of questions about, like, okay, we get this data and we find out that all our female employees are paid 30% less. Now what do you do?
Right. Excellent question. That is the correct question.
Yeah.
Because that is often the case. I mean, usually you find out that somebody needs some kind of an adjustment.
Okay.
30% is unusual, just so that people aren't too worried.
No.
And
what is a typical adjustment then? What are we kind of?
Well, it really, really varies. I'm not sure there's a typical adjustment, but if you're paying your female employees as a whole 30% less, I think they would have noticed it well before now, and frankly, probably have left your company. Because
that's valid. Yeah. Yeah, that's
valid. Yeah, people are. Yeah. So and that is, while we're on the topic, a really good reason to do pay equity. I mean, becoming legally compliant or protecting your brand is one really good reason to do pay equity. Another one is that it's a competitive job market. If you really want to retain talent, talent today expects to be able to have transparency and have trust with an organization. The old idea that it's a paternal organization that can kind of do what it wants in secret isn't going to retain top talent anymore. So yeah, another good reason to do pay equity. So if you do pay equity, I would say it's more usually in the range of like 2%, 8% adjustments like that. I have seen 30%, but it's rare.
Okay.
And
so what does that, how does that, so you have to go through person by person. Is that like how you have to?
Well, yes, you do. Although pay equity primarily is about groups of people, not individuals. So the point of pay equity is to make sure that groups of people are being paid differently. So say you have two groups of people that are doing work of equal value, essentially the same or similar work in your organization. And one of those groups is mostly white people, and one of those groups is mostly Black people, and the group of Black people is getting paid way less. You need to adjust that entire group's salary upwards. So it's more oriented towards job bands and groups than individuals, but you do sometimes adjust individual incomes. And how you do that is also very much determining whether it is a successful process for your company or a painful process. And in order to do it successfully, you need to do it intentionally, mindfully, and slowly. So you don't bring up the topic the first time at the meeting where you're announcing adjustments.
Yes.
You bring up the idea well before that. And so you give people a chance to understand what you're doing. Ideally, you do a couple of presentations on what pay equity is. What does that mean legally? And then it's really good if you can do one or two really visual, basic presentations about what pay equity data analysis even is, because it's not intuitive. Pay equity on a mathematical sense is not, it's not easy to understand. So it's really nice to bring out a visual or do some storytelling and have people actually understand the basics of the math, because that grounds the process in, like, it's not just somebody's opinion, or this isn't just us being bullied again. And it's really important that you do that before you talk about the results from your organization, because
Yes.
people, once you get anywhere near actual results from your organization, people can't hear anything anymore. Of course not, you're talking about their salaries or their hourly rate. So it's really important that you spend either 1 or 2 minimum staff meetings or staff Zooms, or if you have an online learning space, whatever, however you communicate, that you spend some time actually socializing the idea of pay equity and making sure that people get grounded in the actual math, because it is a math thing. And then they won't freak out so hard when you say, oh, this one person or this one group of people is getting a raise and you're not. Especially what happens is that people, when they hear they're doing pay equity, if they're in a social protected identity, they get excited that they think they're gonna get a raise.
Right.
And if they don't, that can make whatever tensions are present in the culture even worse.
Okay.
So that's something that is much more effectively dealt with before that meeting that announces raises than after.
So is there any resources? So I know, companies have the opportunity to hire you, you do that. Let's say I'm a startup, I've got, a new HR person, but I'm really keen to do it, but I just don't want to screw it up, right? Like I don't want to do it wrong. So for anybody who's not on Heather's newsletter, you should be. I said your newsletter is one of my favorite. I love data. So that's a great resource. But what are some other tools that you know of that people could to get some knowledge?
Sure. Well, almost every professional organization now that you belong to will have a group or a section or a committee on this. So whether you do HR, whether you do compensation, whether you do hiring, they all have it. And also, interestingly, almost every jurisdiction, so governments also have gotten very involved in producing things. If you're in Canada, Statistics Canada has some really good downloadable tutorials and guides on how to do it. And the United States has too, so does Europe. So check out, because the good thing about finding resources that are specific to your jurisdiction is that they will have the laws and the precedents of your specific jurisdiction, because it matters where you are. So I would recommend the governments, which is very unusual for me.
Okay. And that's so I'm going to circle back, because I think something that you touched on, we're going to talk a little bit about transparency afterwards, because that's my sort of like thumping ground, is, I'm sure a lot of HR people's ears went like this when they said, wait, someone can come into my organization and ask me about my equity? Like, wait, right? Because I think that most people do not understand that that's a possibility.
Yes. It's more than a possibility. I would say it's turning into a likelihood.
Right. Okay.
Depending on where you are, the laws now in certain jurisdictions say that it doesn't matter. People don't have to ask for it. You have to display it.
Yes.
You have to display proof of pay equity. But across sectors, I've seen an increase in people actually going to court and saying this is not okay. I mean, it's the tenor of the times, right? People are getting sick of being disproportionately impacted in negative ways by their social identities. And there are very few ways that are mathematically provable, and pay equity is one of those. So absolutely. I want to just mention, Allison, before we move on, one other fantastic resource, and that is Buffer. Do you know about, have you? So Buffer is fantastic. Buffer is one of the leaders, both scientifically and kind of culturally, of making their pay transparent, setting pay equity goals that are way, way above what's legally required. And that's another thing we should mention, is that lots of companies use pay equity analysis not simply to comply with the law, but actually to make their companies better more attractive, more transparent, and a great place to work. So check out Buffer for resources too, because they have lots of cool stuff. Also, Google has some good stuff too. Google
Yes,
pay equity stuff is also good.
And a Canadian company called Unbounce in the
Okay,
West
I don't know
Coast.
them.
Yeah, so they just started a pay parity project.
It's called Unbounce?
Yeah, Unbounce. So they do landing pages, not the landing pages for whatever, but they're a tech company in the West Coast. And so Moms at Work has signed on to the pay parity pledge so that they can help support small things. But you should get in touch with them because they would, or I can put you in touch because they would love to have you.
Yeah, fantastic. What a great connection. Okay, good.
So I spend a significant amount of my time talking about pay transparency as an HR person, as a recruiting tool, as all of those things that you just said. People are getting to the point where they are no longer interested, and my group is like senior, mid to senior level women who are asking the hard asks, and it is astonishing to us as a group that we still have to ask and are then provided with pretty nonsense responses about why they're not telling us how much they'd like to pay us. So can you talk a bit about pay transparency and sort of why this is happening, like why they're so resistant to sharing, like what are some of the reasoning, and like talk a bit about that. Yeah, and I laugh at it all the time because it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, Allison. I don't think I have any data or evidence on why people are resistant. My experience is that people are resistant to change in general, and what we're seeing in HR culture is a radical change driven a lot by the new generations that are here. I mean, we've kind of made a deal in the past where, some large company will take care of you for 50 years and you'll kind of accept it and quietly do your work. And both sides of that social contract are now gone, right? And now that the company isn't necessarily going to protect you and take care of you for the next 50 years, you're a lot more invested, or everyone is a lot more invested in understanding what's going on under the hood, where the balance of power actually lies. And the people who retain power are much more interested in the status quo.
Right. That's exactly the problem.
And that's really what it boils down to. I mean, it's not a math problem.
Nope.
It's a power problem. It's a status quo problem. And there's also what I will say, I experience a lot of fear of getting it wrong. I work with a lot of C-level people, and they say, we don't want to talk about data equity, whether it's pay equity or equity in how we report out our DEI stats, because of course, there's a lot of different ways you can report diversity in your organization. Some of them look a lot better for your organization than others. Down to even how we use our models in our organizations, like how we use predictive machine learning as huge race problems and gender problems. And a lot of people say to me, I'm afraid of, if we start doing this, we're going to get it wrong. And I very calmly say to them, well, you're already doing it wrong, so you might as well try. Like that fear presupposes you aren't doing it wrong.
Right, you are.
I can guarantee you that you are. I've been doing this for 20 years. You're doing it wrong, and we can help you do it right and do it better before a judge is telling you that you should, or all your customers are leaving your brand, because right now, absolutely, in the current climate, trying to do it correctly with transparency is much, much better than hoping you're doing it right in secrecy. And that's just a terrible business decision.
and on the transparency thing, because I'm like, it's nice for people to hear someone who's not me screaming this from the rooftops, is for businesses, because I know that this will be seen by businesses. Pay transparency in two lines. Pay transparency is important because
pay transparency is important
Gaia.
Pay transparency in 2 lines. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
can certainly talk about it all day, but to
yeah,
boil
yeah.
it down in 2 lines is much harder. Pay transparency is important because it's the only way your team and your clients are going to trust you.
Right. That's the thing. Transparency equals trust.
Yeah.
Right? There's no longer sort of an appetite for this, like you said, under the hood. It's like, no, we can't tell you, right?
Right.
No, we can't show you. Pay
Right.
transparency equals trust in your employer, in your brands, and this is what people are supporting you as an organization, not just as an employee, but as a customer. And you're
Right.
yeah, this last year has changed things substantially.
Absolutely. Pay transparency allows everyone to make an informed choice.
Right.
And if you don't want that, you have much bigger problems than pay transparency.
That's right. I think
And if you're willing to work for an organization that doesn't want that, we need to find ways to support you and move you past that.
Move you past that. And I think that's a lot of the process is sort of like unlearning the things that you've been told, right?
Right.
Unlearning that you're not worthy of that information, that
Yes.
you should accept that sort of thing. And it's a narrative I hear from women all the time. They're like, no, we can't ask that. And I was like, you absolutely can. Absolutely can, right?
Absolutely. And the more that it becomes, I mean, I feel, Allison, it's very similar to using the pronouns.
Yes.
So my pronouns that I use right now are she and her, which is probably what pronouns you would use for me if you met me on the street and just looked at me. So if I didn't put my pronouns in my email or in my, Twitter, I wouldn't probably have that much to lose because people would use the correct pronouns. I have a child whose pronouns are not the pronouns that you would use if you met this child on the street, and it's very, very painful for her to not be referred to by the correct pronouns. And so she, of course, puts her pronouns on, her university meet and greets and her emails and her Twitter and stuff. And so we all do.
Right.
We all put our pronouns to normalize it. And it's the same thing. You see everybody everywhere using the pronouns. And it's the same thing with pay transparency. It shouldn't be up to marginalized women to push for pay transparency. That's ridiculous. I mean, that's the way it often is.
Yeah, that's the way it is.
Social change happens. And but in this era of like lots of people with privilege trying to figure out how to do things better, that is one way. And if you are in a position of privilege, make your pay transparent. You don't have to wait for institutional change. If you know how much you get paid, you can make that transparent. I don't know if you know the comedian Maria Bamford. She's a huge advocacy for pay transparency, and in comedy, of course, women get paid much, much less than men, or they did in the past. I don't know currently. And so she does make her pay transparent, and what she pays her because they pay their own opening acts and they pay their managers, and so she has like a public thing where you can see all the money that comes in and all the money that goes out.
Okay, so what is this person's name? I have never heard of this person, and I need to.
Okay, her first name is Maria.
Yep.
And her second name is Bamford, Bamford, Maria Bamford. She's the person, if you watch Netflix, she has a show on Netflix called Lady Dynamite.
Okay.
She's very, very, very unique.
Okay.
Not everyone's cup of tea, but in terms of pay transparency, she's absolutely been a force to reckon with in terms of pay transparency. Yeah, so I mean, pay transparency is important because it's the only way your business is going to survive the next 10 years. That's the other thing I'd say. I don't care if you're a giant business or a small. I mean, I guess we'll know a lot more tonight.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, for sure. So you have been a data scientist for.
Data scientist is an interesting word. Data scientist is a new word. I'm a mathematical statistician, and I've been that for a long, long time. And then, I currently bill myself as a data scientist. I've been doing pay equity analysis for over a decade.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and all kinds of equity in data for over a decade, and really love it, because I think it's a way that you can affect social change in an arena that matters. I mean, we can feel good and that's great, but why don't we pay them well?
Right. And do you also still do research?
Yeah, for sure.
So other than doing this with companies, you have a whole other, and I know this because I read your newsletter. Now you're gonna have all these people sign up for your newsletter, especially in like areas around like bias in data, which I find fascinating, right? So can you talk a little bit about bias in data?
Yeah, sure. So that's right. I'm the founder of a company called We All Count, a project for equity in data. And everything we do, all the research we do, all the projects we do, all the training and teaching that we do focuses on that specific thing, equity in data. So there's this idea that quantitative data has no worldview and it is entirely objective. And the reason that it has that reputation is that the worldview in most quantitative data perfectly reflects the cisgender white male view.
Yes.
And so they don't notice that it has a worldview because it perfectly matches their worldview. Okay. And that if you really get into, and I'm not talking even about the things that surround data, I'm talking about the actual data sets themselves, the actual choices that are made in math, the actual choices in what to count, how to count it, what to put on a dashboard, what to put on a map, how to define things in terms of KPIs or business success. All of those things have bias embedded into them. And almost all of that bias is disproportionately bad for people of color, Indigenous people, women, people with disabilities, people who are differently abled, people who are refugees, immigrants. So we develop tools and we do trainings on how to understand this, how to surface it, and how to do it differently.
Okay. And you have a number of courses, one of which I'm like going to be taking. Can you talk a little bit about those courses? Because I know that there's a lot of people who are very interested in that.
Yeah, sure. So we used to do a lot of in-person teaching, but during the pandemic, we've actually switched over to do online training. And strangely enough, it's working better.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Because it is a vulnerable topic when we get into how racism is reflected in data or how sexism is reflected in data. Those are very sensitive topics, and it's helpful for people to be able to listen and participate live, as well as review the recordings, ask questions later, things like that. So the main workshop that we do is called Foundations of Data Equity, and that's open to anyone. And you can find it, we do it about once a week right now on our website. You can find that. And then also we have started to offer several very specific workshops that are sector specific. And one of them related to your group is data equity for HR professionals. And that is based on our experience with pay equity, designing dashboards, how to collect social identity data when you should and should not collect social identity data, how to even do something like take a simple average or build a dashboard that isn't really problematic for women, people of color, people with disabilities, things like that. So yeah, and we're very hands-on, very oriented towards teaching tools that are practical and can be implemented right away, as well as tools that can be implemented down the line. We're not an academic organization at all. We don't spend most of our time thinking about concepts and how better the world would be if this and that. We're tool builders rather than thought leaders, I think.
Right, exactly. Okay, right. And I'm hoping, so this is sort of just like scratches the surface, right? We've got half an hour, we've like scratched the surface, but we're gonna put links to all of the things that Heather does. I'm gonna put a sign up link for your newsletter, whether you like it or not. And because I was like, I look forward to it. I like read your newsletter with my coffee. I'm like, that's a good point. That's a good point. And especially, I think it's so important because this has been a huge topic in our Moms at Work group about, we want to do this right. People feel overwhelmed that they don't know how to do this. And now we actually have a course you know, can you tell me approximately how much it is? It's
$475, and
right.
that includes the full course or full recording of the course, downloadable workbooks, and it also includes 12 months of access to our online learning platform, which is
right.
where I am on there pretty much every day, and we talk about new tools, we answer people's questions. It's kind of like Facebook, except they're not stealing your data.
Great.
Sorry to anybody out there who works for Facebook.
Yeah,
we all have a business model.
Sorry, not sorry, right? That's it. So I want to thank you for being here. I'm going to put up those links for everybody to watch. And now we know where to find Heather if we need her, and really looking forward to taking your course. I'm going to sign up for that. So thank you
for
so much
having me, Allison. And thank you for the work you're doing. It's very important.
All right. Thanks for being here.
Bye.